Chapter 3. Ruy Lopez, Old Steinitz Defense. We will replay the main line and the important sublines, with pauses for tactics. Welcome back to our Ruy Lopez timeline. In Chapter 1, Morphy taught us the first modern question: after bb5, black should not sit still. Black challenges the bishop with a 6, gains queenside space, and looks for central counterplay. In Chapter 2, white castled early and black grabbed the e4 pawn. That gave us the open Ruy Lopez question: can black win material before development becomes a problem? Now we move into the Steinitz era. Our model game is Chigorin against Steinitz from the 1892 World Championship match in Havana. The opening is the old Steinitz defense: e4 e5 knight f3 and c6 bishop b5 d6. This is not the modern main line with a 6 and nf6. It is older, more restrained, and very instructive. Steinitz believed that a cramped position could be defended if the key points were secure. Here, black protects e5 first, accepts less space, and waits for white to overextend. Your job in this lecture is to notice the change in philosophy. Morphy wanted rapid development and open lines. Steinitz is asking a quieter question: if black defends the center carefully, can white prove that the extra space is actually useful? e4. White begins in classical style. The Ruy Lopez starts from the e-pawn. White wants space, quick development, and pressure on black's central structure. e5. Black accepts the open game. Both sides claim the center, so the next battle will be over which side can maintain that center with pieces. Knight f3. White attacks e5. This is the simplest way to ask black how the center will be defended. Knight c6. Black develops and protects e5. This is the normal open game reply, but the knight on c6 also becomes the target of the Spanish bishop. Bishop b5. The Ruy Lopez. White does not attack e5 directly with the pawn. White attacks the defender. That indirect pressure is the heart of the Spanish. d6. This is the old Steinitz defense. Black reinforces e5 immediately. The move is solid, but it also blocks the dark squared bishop and gives black a smaller share of space. That is the Steinitz trade-off: black accepts restraint in exchange for central security. Let's see what happens if a 6 is played instead of d6. a6. This was Morphy's answer from Chapter 1. Black challenges the bishop first, then develops and looks for activity. The old Steinitz defense is different: black protects e5 before asking the bishop a question. Let's return back to the main line. Knight c3. White develops another piece and increases central control. In many modern Ruy Lopez positions, white castles early. Chigorin chooses a more direct development scheme, keeping the center under pressure. Bishop d7. Black develops carefully. The bishop protects the knight on c6, prepares possible exchanges on b5, and keeps the e5 point secure. Black is not fighting for space yet. Black is building a defensive shell. d4. White strikes in the center. This is the natural test. If black has chosen a passive setup, white should ask whether the center can be opened before black finishes development. Knight on the g-file to e7. A very Steinitz-like answer. The knight from g8 comes to e7, adding another defender to c6 and preparing an g6. Black keeps the e5 pawn protected and avoids exposing the king too soon. The price is clear, black's pieces are compact, but not very active. Let's see what happens if e takes d4 is played instead of knight on the g-file to e7. E takes d4. Black can release the tension immediately. But Steinitz often preferred to keep the central strongpoint intact. The pawn on e5 is the anchor of black's position. Let's return back to the main line. Bishop g5. White pins the knight and adds pressure. White wants to make black's defensive setup feel uncomfortable. If the knight cannot move freely, black's center may become harder to maintain. f6. Black challenges the bishop. This move looks ugly to modern eyes because it weakens dark squares around the king. But it also fits the defensive logic. Black refuses to let the pin remain and keeps the e5 point supported. Bishop e3. White retreats and keeps the bishop pair. White has provoked f6, so black's kingside is slightly weakened. Now white can continue developing and look for a moment to open the game. Knight g6. Black completes the knight route. The knight on g6 helps defend e5 and watches f4 and h4. Again, black is not claiming the initiative. Black is making it hard for white to break through. Queen d2. White connects development with a possible kingside plan. The queen supports bh6 ideas and prepares long castling in some positions. White is trying to turn black's compact setup into a target. Black finally asks the Spanish bishop a question. Notice the timing. In the Morphy defense, a6 came on move 3. Here, Steinitz first secured e5, developed the dark squared bishop, and only then challenged the bishop. Bishop a4. White keeps the bishop. The bishop stays on the a4 e8 diagonal and preserves the familiar Spanish pressure. b5. Black gains queenside space. Even in the old Steinitz defense, black still wants the Morphy-style expansion when the moment is right. The difference is that black's center is already heavily defended. Bishop b3. White keeps the bishop on the long diagonal. The bishop points toward f7, which may matter if white can open lines quickly. Knight a5. Black attacks the bishop. The knight heads to a5 to challenge one of white's most important pieces. This is a recurring Spanish idea. Black asks whether the bishop on b3 is strong enough to justify white's space advantage. Kingside castles. White castles. White chooses king safety on the king side, keeping the center ready for action. Black builds the dark square chain. The pawns on d6, e5, f6, c6, and b5 give black a compact but sturdy shape. This is a key Steinitz lesson. A cramped position can survive if the important entry squares are covered. D takes e5. White opens the center. Chigorin decides that waiting will only help black organize. By capturing on e5, white asks whether black's f-pawn advance has created tactical weaknesses. F takes e5. Black recaptures with the f-pawn. This opens the f-file and keeps a pawn on e5. Structurally, black has loosened the king side, but dynamically black has a useful rook file and central presence. Bishop g5. White returns to the pinning idea. The bishop targets e7 and makes it awkward for black to develop smoothly. White wants to turn black's cramped pieces into a lasting problem. Bishop e7. Black breaks the pin by development. This is the Steinitz method in miniature. Do not panic, do not chase ghosts, develop a piece and ask white to show something concrete. Rook on the f-file to d1. White brings a rook to the center. The rook on d1 pressures d6 and lines up against black's defensive pawn chain. White has more space and more active rooks. Knight b7. Black retreats the knight toward the center. The knight on a5 did its job by disturbing the bishop. Now it heads back toward useful defensive squares. Black is still cramped, but the pieces are coordinating. Bishop takes e7. White removes a defender. By exchanging on e7, white tries to reduce black's ability to hold the dark square complex. Queen takes e7. Black recaptures with the queen. The queen defends e5, connects the rooks soon, and keeps the position together. White has activity, but black's key points are still defended. Knight g5. White jumps forward. The knight attacks h7 and e6, and it increases the pressure on black's king side. This is the moment where white tries to prove that black's f6 move created real targets. Rook f8. Black uses the newly opened file. Because black recaptured with the f-pawn, the rook can come to f8. The move defends f7 and prepares counterplay. A structural concession has become an active resource. Please feel free to pause the video and find the best continuation for white. If you found knight takes h7, rook h8, queen g5, knight f4, queen takes e7, check, excellent. Let's see the idea on the board. Knight takes h7. White grabs the h-pawn. This is ambitious. White wins material and attacks the rook on f8 indirectly, but the knight also moves far from the center. Rook h8. Black traps the knight's route. The rook attacks the knight and forces white to make a concrete decision. Steinitz is inviting white to prove that the raid on h7 was worth the time. Queen g5. White offers a queen trade and attacks g6. This is a practical decision. If white can simplify while winning a pawn, the knight adventure may be justified. Knight f4. Black refuses to remain passive. The knight jumps to f4, attacking the queen and creating threats. This is important. Steinitz was not only defending. Once white's pieces stretched forward, black looked for counterplay. Queen takes e7, check. White exchanges queens. Without queens, white may hope the extra pawn and active pieces will matter. But the knight on h7 is still awkward, and black's rooks are ready to work. King takes e7. Black recaptures and centralizes the king. In queenless middle games, the king is not only a target. It can become a fighting piece. Black's king helps hold the center. Knight g5. White brings the knight back toward the game. This was necessary. The knight on h7 could easily become trapped, so white returns it to an active square. Rook h5. Black attacks the knight. The rook lift is energetic. Black uses the h-file to gain time, and white's knight must move again. White supports the knight and gains space. But this also creates a hook on h4. In many Spanish structures, pawn moves near the king give the opponent concrete targets. Rook takes h4. Black captures the pawn. Black wins back material and opens lines. The rook on h4 is active, and white's kingside has become loose. g3. White attacks the rook. This is the natural way to question black's rook adventure, but it also weakens more light squares around white's king. Rook g4. Black keeps the rook active. The rook stays on the fourth rank, pressuring g3 and preparing to swing across the board. Knight f3. White centralizes the knight. White wants to consolidate, bring the knight home, cover h4 and e5, and reduce black's activity. Rook f8. Black doubles down on the f-file. The rook returns to f8 and keeps pressure in front of white's king. Black's earlier f-pawn move continues to shape the game. Rook d2. White defends and prepares to double rooks. White still has chances because black's structure is not beautiful. The question is whether white can organize before black's rooks become too active. Knight c5. Black improves the knight. The knight comes back from b7 to c5, aiming at e4 and b3. Steinitz's pieces slowly emerge from the defensive shell. Knight h2. White attacks the rook. White tries to push black's rook away and gain time for consolidation. Rook g6. Black calmly retreats. The rook remains on the sixth rank, ready to swing to h6 or f6. Black's rooks are becoming the most active pieces on the board. Please feel free to pause the video and find the best continuation for white. If you found rook e1, knight h3, check, king g2, knight g5, rook on the d-file to e2, excellent. Let's see the idea on the board. Rook e1. White centralizes the rook. The e-file is a natural Spanish file. White wants pressure against e5 and a way to meet black's activity with counter pressure. Knight h3, check. Black checks. The knight lands on h3, using the weakened kingside squares. This is the reward for white's earlier pawn advances to h4 and g3. King g2. White steps away. The king remains exposed, and black can continue using the h-file and f-file together. Knight g5. Black reroutes the knight. The knight returns to g5, attacking e4 and h3 squares and helping the rooks. Black's pieces are now coordinated. Rook on the d-file to e2. White doubles rooks on the e-file. White still wants to challenge e5. If white can win that pawn or force exchanges, the position may stabilize. Rook h6. Black prepares to double on the h-file. This is the turning point in the strategic story. Black began cramped, but now black's rooks have open files and clear targets. Rook e3. White reinforces the third rank. White tries to defend laterally, but black's attack is growing faster than white's central pressure. Rook on the f-file to h8. Black doubles rooks on the h-file. The h-file was opened because white's knight captured on h7 and white pushed h4. Steinitz has transformed white's ambitious play into a target. Knight f1. White retreats to defend. The knight comes back to guard h2 and g3. White is now reacting to black's initiative. Bishop h3, check. Black brings another piece into the attack. The bishop check forces the king to make another concession. Black's once passive dark squared bishop has found a powerful diagonal. King g1. White returns to g1. White's king is boxed in, and black can keep improving without rushing. Bishop g4. Black centralizes the bishop. The bishop attacks f3 and helps control the dark squares. Black's pieces are now much more active than white's. King g2. White tries to step out. But the king is still surrounded by pressure from the bishop, knight, and doubled rooks. Please feel free to pause the video and find the best continuation for black. The point is b4. Black gains a tempo by attacking the knight and driving it away from c3. b4. Black gains queenside space as well. This is a powerful detail. Black is attacking on the king's side, but also fixes white's queenside and gives the knight more stable squares. f4. White finally hits the center and king's side. White wants to open lines for counterplay before black's attack crashes through. Bishop h3, check. Black checks again. Steinitz keeps the initiative. Instead of reacting to every pawn thrust, black forces white's king to keep moving. King f2. White steps toward the center. In principle, the king may be safer away from the h-file. In practice, black's pieces are ready for tactics. Rook f6. Black brings the rook to the f-file. The rook attacks f4 and increases pressure on white's central break. The f-file resource keeps returning throughout this game. Knight e2. White develops defensive support. The knight comes to e2 to cover g3 and f4, but it also blocks some of white's rooks. Knight takes e4, check. Black breaks through. The knight captures on e4 with check. The central strongpoint that black defended from move 3 has now become a tactical platform. King g1. White moves back. White is now losing coordination. The king is under fire, and black's pieces dominate the files. Bishop takes f1. Black removes a defender. The bishop captures on f1, eliminating a key piece and dragging white's rook into a passive role. F takes e5. White tries counterplay. White captures in the center, but the attack on the king is now more important than the pawn count. D takes e5. Black recaptures. Black keeps a central pawn and opens more lines for the pieces. Rook takes f1. White recaptures and reduces material. This looks like a chance to survive, but black's rook activity remains decisive. Rook on the f-file to h6. Black returns to the h-file. The attack is simple and strong, rooks on the h-file, king in danger, and white's pieces tied to defense. Rook f7, check. White checks. This is the right fighting spirit. White uses the active rook to bother black's king and buy time. King d6. Black calmly centralizes. The king steps away and remains close enough to support the center. Rook takes g7. White grabs another pawn. White is collecting material, but the attack on white's king is now the more urgent story. Rook h1, check. Black invades. The rook reaches h1 with check. This is the kind of payoff Steinitz was aiming for, Once the position opens, the better coordinated pieces matter more than temporary pawns. King g2. White has only limited shelter. The king moves to g2, but black's rooks and knight still have forcing moves. Knight d2. Black improves with tempo ideas. The knight heads toward f1 and b3 ideas, while also supporting checks and attacks on e4. Rook g6, check. White checks again. White tries to use the active rook to interrupt black's coordination. King c7. Black steps to safety. The king avoids checks and lets the attacking pieces continue. g4. White gives the king looked and attacks. But this also opens more lines around the king. In a position with active rooks, every pawn move near the king is double-edged. Rook on 8th rank to h2, check. Black doubles the rooks on the 2nd rank. This is domination. The rooks have moved from defensive duty to full invasion. King g3. White runs toward the center. The king has no comfortable square. Knight f1, check. The knight joins with check. Black's knight, bishop, and rooks are all working together. This is the final strategic lesson. Steinitz's cramped setup survived, then counterattacked once white's pieces overreached. King f3. White steps away, but the attack continues. The position is already lost for white. Rook h3, check. Black gives another decisive check, and white resigned. The final position captures the whole chapter. Black's opening was modest, even passive-looking. But black defended the e5 strongpoint, kept the structure together, and waited until white's ambitious kingside play created targets. That is the Steinitz-era contribution to the Ruy Lopez. The Spanish is not only about immediate tactics or fast development. It is also about the long argument between space and solidity. In the next chapter, we will continue along the timeline and see how Chigorin's counterplay ideas helped shape the closed Ruy Lopez, b7, b5, d6, na5, and a much richer fight for the Spanish bishop and the center. As we saw in this lesson, Steinitz's d6 secures e5 first, accepts less space, and waits for white to overextend. After f takes e5, black uses the opened files, active rooks, and kingside targets to turn solid defense into counterattack.